In this video, I will be going over the Warlock class specialization called the Great Old One. This is the last of the specializations provided by the player's handbook. However, I do believe there are others provided by various supplements. This class specialization is a bit different than the other specializations because your character does not tend to form a pact directly with the patron you have chosen. And in fact, there's a very good chance that you actually did not choose this particular patron, depending on the kind of background you select. Instead, the discovery of the patron, and subsequently the use of the powers it provides, creates an implied pact, with no formal discussion or negotiation having taken place. As your character uses the power provided by the given patron, the pact further binds your character to that patron, eventually reaching a point of no return. Think of it as if your character stumbled upon information of this patron, and through that discovery was able to gain knowledge of how to use those powers for their own means. Obviously, there's an implied discovery having led to additional information that linked capabilities to this particular patron that your character then takes advantage of. This concept is perfect for someone who wants to play the type of character that gets drunk on power, and the more power they use, the more addicted to it they become. And this is how this class differs, as it is expected that your character has discovered something that leads your character down this path, and as they continue to traverse that path, your character unlocks the ability to cast spells and calling on its power, basically praying to that particular patron without really understanding how you're doing it. However, because this patron is so powerful, the entity may have no knowledge of who your character is, but the use of your power still ties you to them, thus forming an informal yet very binding pact. Even if the entity gains any level of awareness of who or what your character is, they might still be totally indifferent to that particular relationship. But at the same time, they might also see that as a means to return to the material plane, without any indication to you that that is their end goal. And simply using their powers might be enough to open the means for them to be able to regain access to the material plane. And there's no rule that states it has to be the material plane. If your character has acquired the ability to travel to other planes of existence, simply traveling to that particular plane might trigger that capability for that entity to return. So you got to be very careful. However, other entities might not even notice you using their powers, pretty much giving your character unfettered access to their spells and the features that they grant, especially as your character levels through this particular subclass. As a DM, I will usually encourage a player who is looking to create their own patron to use this kind of class. It is really the best fit for this type of structure, especially if the player is building a character who has no idea of where their powers have come from. Additionally, this is a perfect fit for a character whose background incorporates sudden and unexpected abilities that are slowly being discovered in their youth, with no real understanding of how those powers came to be. Kind of links to the previous statement, but this gives you an indication of what you could generate for a good background. With that, let's begin to look at the various features provided by this particular class specialization. As with the other class specializations, when you choose this specialization at level 1, you're going to acquire two features right from the start. The first one is going to be the expanded spell list, while the second is going to be this awakened mind feature. However, before we take a look at the awakened mind feature, let's take a look at the expanded spell list. As previously stated, this particular list of spells is supplemental to that provided by your pact magic. So they won't be listed here, but they are available for you to choose if you have chosen this particular specialization. The level that you see here is the spell slot level that particular spell represents. So when you unlock the ability to cast second level spells, this is when you have the option of choosing either one of these particular spells here, as opposed to one of the spells that's in your standard Warlock spell list. We could have selected these two spells right from the start, as opposed to Hellish Rebuke and Hex, but I'm going to stick with these for the time being. Additionally, you will gain access to additional spells as when you unlock the ability to cast level 3 spells, level 4 spells, and level 5 spells. Now, as with the standard pact magic spells, they will make use of a spell slot when you actually cast them. and they can be cast at higher levels as long as they indicate that they're going to gain any benefit from them. Those that don't indicate that they're going to gain any benefit from them can still use a higher level spell slot. You just won't have any additional advantage to that fact. You'll just be burning through a higher level spell slot. And that's really the one thing that I don't like about the Warlock, is that as you level this particular character up, you lose access to your first and your second level spell slots, but you're replacing them with the higher level spell slots. So it's kind of a hit and miss in that particular aspect of things. Now, the one thing that you will notice about this particular class is there is a subtle difference as to how things should theoretically work. In a lot of ways, your unfettered access to abilities and skills will tie directly into your features. In this case, the Awakened Mind is the first one that I'm going to cover in respect to the additional features past the expanded spell list. And with this, you're able to kind of unlock, if you will, psionic abilities, in that you are telepathically capable of communicating with other particular creatures as long as they understand a language. They don't have to understand the same language you are using to communicate to them with. They will still understand you, but they have to be able to understand a language. So, for example, you could not communicate with a slime, but you could theoretically telepathically communicate with a goblin or an orc, even if you don't speak either of their languages. Unlike other abilities, though, this one doesn't require a rest period, so you can pretty much use it as often as you wish, as long as there are creatures within 30 feet of you that you wish to communicate with, and they can understand that language or a language of any kind. That's really all it comes down to. And that essentially completes all of the features that you're going to gain at level 1. The next one you're going to get is at level 6. And the next feature that you will gain is called Entropic Ward. And this essentially gives you the ability to make a particular creature who is attacking you potentially take or suffer disadvantage on that particular attack. You have to use your reaction to do this, and if they do in fact miss you, you gain advantage on your next attack roll as long as it is done before the end of your next turn. So let's say right off the outset a creature attacks you. You use your reaction right at the start of their turn to give them disadvantage on their attack roll. They miss. You're up 2 rounds later, so one of your teammates is gone and then all of a sudden you go. As long as you actually attack them, and it doesn't matter whether it is a melee attack, whether it is a spell that requires an attack roll, or anything of that particular sort, as long as you do that before the end of your next turn, you will gain an advantage to that attack roll. So how is this actually going to work? Well, it's actually fairly straightforward. The first thing, because of the fact that it requires a short or a long rest for you to be able to reuse it, you're going to want to add it to your actions page. And we'll call this the Great Old One, just for the example. I'm going to minimize these two and set up the use. So I'm changing this to 1 use every rest. So this, when you set it to rest, that sets it to be short or long rests. So using it is fairly simple. I've added this particular combat situation to the combat tracker. Right now the ape is currently active when it comes to their turn, and the idea here is that your character is going to be next in the turn cycle. So, as a result of that, I'm going to make an attack with the ape. In this case, I didn't react to that. However, this particular ape has a second attack because it has multi-attack capabilities. So my character is going to be somewhat, oh god, kind of reaction to that and go, okay, I'm going to give you disadvantage on that because I'm using my reaction. So I now have to toggle as the Dungeon Master disadvantage on this particular character or attack. So let's say that's the roll that I do. And in this case, I miss as the ape. Okay, scenario 1 is now done. Now it is the turn of the Warlock. Well, in this particular case, as long as I attack with anything that I have here, as long as it requires an attack roll, I will gain advantage. And I can simply enable that by clicking on this button. Now this precludes going through and setting up any form of effect here. And really there isn't much of a record that you've done this, except within the actual chat log that the attack will have advantage or disadvantage. So in the case of the Dungeon Master screen, when I made the ape roll its attack, a DIS tag showed up and the die color is red. And for those of you who are unable to see red, you'll want to look for that DIS tag. But in the case of my advantage roll, all I have to do is now attack, and I'm going to gain advantage of that particular attack roll, even though I don't have a target here. So let me target that, and then let's try that again. I keep forgetting to do that. So in this case, I have now hit the ape, and then I do my damage roll. I'm not gaining any additional bonuses to the damage that I'm going to do, but I am gaining the advantage of the reaction because the ape missed when they made their attack. For those of you who are unable to see the color green, this die is green in color, but you'll see here an ADV tag, and you can look for that in order to ensure that you actually had the advantage properly enabled. Now, for those of you who do not have the ability to see these colors, there is a way that we can set this up as an effect within this particular feature so that you can make use of it and still be confident that it got used. We do that by creating two separate effects. I'm going to add two effects to this particular character. One is going to be called Grant Disadvantage. And in this particular case, this is called Entropic Ward, semicolon, and it will be Grant Dis ATK. That is going to force any particular creature that this is put on to be granted a disadvantage attack roll against you. And in fact, actually, I think it goes on yourself. And this will be on the next roll. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to put that in place. I'm going to set the attack up so that the ape is going to go again. And then I'm going to make another attack roll. And we can see that, in fact, that did work. The ape was granted a disadvantage on the attack. You don't see that here, but it is definitely represented on the Dungeon Master side. And you may have noticed that it rolled 2 dice. This particular ape has missed. So, as long as you now attack that particular creature before the end of your turn, you'll be able to grant yourself an advantage on that particular roll. And you can do that by simply doing this. Let's call it Entropic Ward, and ADV ATK. So there's a semicolon here between the word ward and ADV ATK. It will again be on self, and it will again be on next roll. So I'm now going to apply this effect, and then I'm going to make my attack roll. And we can see it's rolled twice. We can also see that it has the ADV tag here, and for those who are able to see green, you'll see a green die roll here. In this case, I hit, so once again, I've done some damage. That's how you can be absolutely certain that this is going to work without the Dungeon Master having to do anything. And essentially forces that Dungeon Master to realize, oh crap, you've used a reaction. But here's the catch. You're using a reaction, which means you will not be able to use this ability again until you have completed a long or short rest. That is the first effect here. The second is if you have already used a reaction, you will not be able to use this. So let's say you took an attack of opportunity prior to your turn coming up, or prior to the ape's turn coming up, in that they are now attacking you. So let's say the succubus went before the ape. You used an attack of opportunity against the succubus because it moved out of your attack range, really, which is generally a melee attack range. And then the ape was next to go. The ape now attacks you. You've already used your reaction, which means you cannot use the Entropic Ward ability. You have to wait until the next round for you to be able to use that again, and that's assuming you haven't already used it in a previous combat round. So as long as this is available to you when you're in your combat situation and under actions here, then as long as this is here, you'll have the ability to use it if you have not used a reaction. That is the key to this particular situation. And let me just give a short rest so that this comes back. And that's really how this comes into play. And that literally covers everything that we need to cover for level 6. At level 10 is where you're going to gain your next feature, and this feature is called Thought Shield. The first thing it is going to give you the ability to resist is that your thoughts can no longer be read by any form of telepathy, and that's psionic telepathy or a spell cast by a priest or a wizard or druid, or as long as they have those abilities. And they simply won't be able to read your mind. But at the same time, if you are attacked with anything that causes psychic damage, you are now resistant to that. So, and this is a permanent resistance. It isn't something that goes away or is selective in any way, shape, or form. At the same time, the person who does do some level of psychic damage to you is going to suffer the exact same amount of damage you yourself took. Now, that's going to be a bit tricky to set up when it comes to an actual action setup here. I have no idea why my mouse went so nuts as it just did there. But anyway, what we're going to want to do is drag and drop this into our Actions tab. We're going to want to make sure that we're in the group selection here. And I called it the Great Old One. We're going to want to move this into this particular group, and we can see that it is now here. Well, how can we set this up for the psychic damage resistance? Well, that's easy. All we have to do is add a new effect and call this Thought Shield. Shield, i.e. not EI, semicolon, resist, colon, and then it's psychic. So PSYCHICK. This gives your character the implicit resistance that you are now going to have. And whenever you are dropped into the combat tracker, the first thing you're going to want to do is that. That way it automatically shows up and is there. In theory, as long as you aren't removed from the combat tracker, this should remain, because there's no expiration when it comes to rounds or on rolls. So it should stick around. Well, now the problem becomes, how do you deal with the damage? Well, there are two ways that this can be dealt with. The easiest is simply to remind the Dungeon Master that you got hit with psychic damage. You have resistant to that particular damage, but the creature does take the same amount of damage you yourself took. So in the case of our combat here, let's say, for example, that the succubus had the ability to hit you with some form of psychic spell. Let's say they hit you for 10 points of damage. Well, with your resistance, you're only going to take 5 points. That 5 points, however, is also going to have to be done to them. So the Dungeon Master is going to have to be able to very quickly modify the amount of hit points, or damage rather, that the succubus has taken, if they have taken any at all. The other way is a little bit more cumbersome, and I generally don't recommend it, but I'll show it here as a demonstration just so that you know that it's available. And that is simply by doing this. You add a damage effect to this particular character, and you leave it blank. And what you do is when you yourself have suffered damage, you simply add a particular damage point here, and you modify nothing more than the bonus field. That bonus field will be set to whatever damage you yourself took. So let's say you took 5 points of damage. Well, you would put 5 there. And then what you would do is you would simply drag and drop that onto the succubus. What it does do is it puts a little bit of the onus on you. Because, oh, and I should have stated that damage type is psychic. PSYCHIC. Oops, I see. So there is a requirement for the psychic damage to be specified. Did I spell that right? Because that looks really wrong. ESY. ESY. Check. Yep, okay. Anyway. And what you do is you literally just drag and drop. And it will automatically do the damage to that particular creature. And that is because it's a damage effect. So you have to very quickly go in, click that, modify. Let's say all of a sudden you took 10 points of damage after resistance. Then you would just drag and drop, boom, you're done. That way the Dungeon Master themselves doesn't really have to do anything. You don't necessarily have to remind the Dungeon Master that they have to do this particular damage. You just have to remind them that, yes, I am doing this because of this ability. And that's as far as it goes. As I said, it's a little bit more cumbersome, but it still works and makes things a little bit convenient for you, the player, because you don't always have to remind the Dungeon Master. You just simply have to remember yourself that you have to do this. Now, the last ability that you're going to gain is going to be gained at level 14. And this ability essentially gives you essentially a means of being able to charm someone so that they respond to you and only you. Now, it isn't in a way where you just simply walk up to somebody, touch them, and you're good to go. You've got control of them. No. This particular individual has to be incapacitated, so knocked out, essentially. Not dying, but knocked out. Highly useful for things where you're dealing with NPCs, and that NPC got knocked out, you can then take control of that particular NPC. And you have the ability to telepathically communicate with them as long as they exist on the same plane that you currently are standing on. So if you both travel to the astral plane, you will still be able to communicate telepathically with that particular creature. If, however, you travel to the astral plane, but they are still left on the material plane, that telepathic connection breaks. They're still charmed, you just can't ask them to do anything or talk to them. But, what do you mean by they're still charmed? Well, the creature is essentially charmed until one of two things have happened. In fact, three. The first, someone has cast a remove cursed spell on that particular creature. The second is that somehow the charm condition is defeated. The third is they're dead. Those are really the only three conditions in which the effect will go away. Now, the charm condition is removed does in fact include whether that charm was removed by somebody else or you have used this ability again to cast it on somebody else. You lose control of that one thrall that you had. So if you've now tried to enthrall another creature, and it succeeds, you will lose the control of the first creature that you had the thrall capability on. So it's not that you can build up an army of thralls. You can literally control one creature at a time. That's your limitation. You'll notice, though, there is no rest period required here. So you could potentially use this consistently and essentially unequivocally. The risk is that you will lose control of the thrall. And if that thrall was initially hostile to you, chances are that creature is going to again be hostile to you. So there are conditions that come into play, but it does give you the ability to essentially use the Great Old One's abilities to shape control of that particular character as long as they are incapacitated in some way, shape, or form. That's being asleep, unconscious, or otherwise unaware of their surroundings. Those are really the conditions that you have to look for. And that actually completes everything that we have to do when it comes to all of the features you're going to gain through this particular class specialization. At this point, as you continue to level your character up, you'll be going and referring back to the Warlock video, as all of those features will be gained from that particular class. This class specialization essentially completes at level 14. And as a result, that completes this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.